9 species, which elephants were one of them, if we make more of them and we protect them, they can offset like all of like car emissions. An Asian elephant is 99.6% a woolly mammoth genetically. It's actually closer to a mammoth than an Asian elephant is to an African elephant. Nature can like repair stuff pretty quick if we kind of give it a chance. So I do think that we can be very smart and let nature, if we give nature a little bit of boost, we could let nature help fix the problems that we created, themselves. It's a directed evolution. Yeah.
Tell us what you're doing in a nutshell, because when I first heard it, I was like, oh, I saw an ad on Instagram and I was like, oh, this is fake or something. This is like a satirical thing that doesn't exist because they're trying to test us and get clicks and then like ... steal my identity. But it's real.
Yeah, it would be a very expensive, very late, it's like we have 114 scientists and 30 like academic partners and postdocs around the world. Is like be a very expensive joke.
Yeah, it's an expensive grift, man. Yeah. Like it's all a big hoax.
I think we've seen online that there's much easier ways to steal people's identity.
I think so.
Like just say that you're a Nigerian prince and send my grandmother an email. But
Indeed.
you don't have to do it this way. So we started a company called Colossal. I was mesmerized by George Church and all the incredible ideas that he had. And we started a company, Colossal, which is, to our knowledge, the world's first de-extinction and species preservation company. And what that means is we're working to bring back extinct species, or at least proxies of them, at least as much as you can, with the DNA that's recovered, and build technologies that help human healthcare and build technologies that can be helpful for conservation. And we want to subsidize that and give all that conservation tech to the world.
And it's beyond incredible, because the ad I saw was something like, hey, we're going to bring back the woolly mammoth. And that's why I was like, yeah, whatever, this is clearly fake. But I happened to be that day talking with Forrest Galante. And I was like, hey, man, have you heard of this? And he's like, actually, I know all about this and I'm on the board. And I was like, wait. So this is not fake. This is a real thing. And he explained it. And then I, of course, said this to him. And he said, I should definitely say this to you because it's probably annoying and you hear it all the time. This is kind of the idea behind Jurassic Park, right? I mean, you had to be influenced by this movie.
So I like this. So on Jurassic Park, believe it or not, we have heard that before.
Yeah, I believe that.
It's come up before. I think the theme music now just plays every time any of us goes into an office. But what's interesting about Jurassic Park is I think it did a really good job of like showcasing and teaching the world that genetic engineering is a thing. Now we're not doing exactly what Jurassic Park was. They were taking ancient DNA, dino DNA from amber, which you can't get. Trust me, you can't get it.
We've tried.
Not that I've tried, but I'm telling you definitively, you cannot get DNA from amber. It's porous, it's bad. Anyway, it doesn't preserve well. But then they were filling in the holes in the gaps of the dino DNA with frog DNA. Think of us as doing it the exact reverse, which I think is arguably a lot easier. We're taking the Asian elephant genome and other genomes that we know produce an Asian elephant. And then we're identifying the genes from the woolly mammoth genome that made a mammoth, and then we're engineering those into architecture that we already know works, right? So I like to think of it as we're slightly smarter Jurassic Park, but what's interesting is that George Church's original sequence that he did, and I forgot what it was on yeast or something, actually from his research shows up in Michael Crichton's book. So
wow.
If you want to be technical, I would argue that Jurassic Park was inspired by George. So in a way, I think it's completely the other way around. And he's not getting the right royalties on it, but yeah.
Right. I like that argument. It's a very lawyerly argument, right? Like, no, we didn't copy Jurassic Park. They copied my co-founder, George Church, who's, for people who are listening, he's kind of like the OG. He's like the Mick Jagger of genetic engineering and DNA. I'm sure he...
Yeah, he is the father of synthetic biology, and he's 6'7", has narcolepsy, and he's insanely smart. And what's weird about your origin story of how you got interested in, or even like, is this real? That was my moment too. I called George Church about something completely different. I wanted to build a computational biology software platform, leveraging AI. I was like, could we build, because I come mostly from software, could we go build something that's really interesting in synthetic biology? So I was like, who do you call? Well, let's call the man. Well, he answered my question in like 7 minutes, and then I had all this time. So I was like, well, what else you got? So we started talking about regenerating neurons and sequencing and DNA synthesis and all these things he's doing. And then he ends with, like, we have like 2 minutes left on the call, and he's like, well, and also I'm working to bring back woolly mammoths to rewild the Arctic to save the world from carbon and methane, and I'll make billions of dollars in carbon credits. I have to go to my next meeting now.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like, was this a moment where like he's showing his like funny side? If it is a joke, it's the longest joke ever from George. Right. And then he like hung up, and I was like, wait, the greatest thing I've ever heard was just said to me, and then he had to go. So I stayed up all night just reading George Church interviews, watching him on Colbert Show and 60 Minutes and all these things. And there was a mammoth through line. So whatever he was talking about, the mammoth would come back. And it was like making this cameo in every single thing. So I was like, I have to learn more. So I was on the phone with him the next day. I was like, can I come see you? And he was like, which I thought the answer was no. He's like, sure. I was like, what about next Thursday? He's like, great. So within a week, like I went from this like last 30-second pitch that he gave me to in his lab half a day. And then we decided we should go do this. So
wow,
it's crazy. But I had that moment like you where I was like, this is insane. Yeah.
Like, I thought this guy was well respected, and here he is telling me he's going to bring back the woolly mammoth. Like, is this the beginning of the downward slope where everyone's like, what happened to that guy? He used to be so...
Yeah, he turned left. He was like going straight for a long time. Then he took a hard left, and everyone's like, wait, what?
And also, I love that you describe one of his chief qualities is has narcolepsy, which tells me that you've been out to eat with him and he's just like falling asleep with a fork in his mouth or something like that.
He has definitely like muppeted out on a Zoom or two. So I know I'm not being interesting if he's looking at the ceiling. Damn it, George.
I grew up with a family friend who had it, and he would routinely would be eating a salad at dinner and he's just like asleep. And I thought he was being silly because I was a little kid at the time. And my mom's like, no, he just actually falls asleep all the time, and he can't drive home if he doesn't have his medication. Like, he can't drive because he'll fall asleep. Yeah, it's I don't think it's a matter of being boring, but yeah, it's a good. It never feels good when the person you're talking to is immediately put out by whatever you're saying, regardless of the health condition. So why the mammoth? You said it was kind of something he had come up with and talked about before, but why not start with like a worm or a bug or a smaller animal like some kind of sheep or something like that?
Something that doesn't require 22 months of gestation and is endangered.
Or doesn't exist at all anymore, right?
Yeah, so exactly. So for us, it was easy, right? We wanted George, we wanted his technologies. He had been working on it for 8 years. We had he had identified the genes that he believed made a mammoth. He had all the core sequencing and engineering tech. So, you kind of got the mammoth with George, right? So that's the commercial answer. Yeah, it's package deal. But why he was interested in the mammoths is he doesn't want to lose elephants. And working on the mammoth kind of gives you an excuse to build all these technologies which can help elephants, so we can understand more about elephant behavior, human-elephant conflict, how to gestate elephants even long-term ex utero in like artificial wombs, how we can eradicate a disease called EEHV, which kills about 25% of elephants year-round. Most people don't know this, but EEHV is the largest killer of elephants in the world, not poaching. And so if we can eradicate that disease, well, we could save more elephants than all other elephant conservation combined worldwide. And so it's something that's really fascinating. But as you could probably guess, there's no big total addressable market in building a business to cure elephant herpes. But if you're building a mammoth and doing all these other interesting things, it can be one of the byproducts along the way that you can go focus on. And then he's very passionate of this whole concept of Pleistocene rewilding. Like, how do we, jumpstart the ecological system that was that was this mammoth steppe that's now this like Arctic tundra. And he's been working with Siberian scientists and scientists in Canada and the Arctic slope, and seeing that they've shown that if you can build the right ecosystem with enough biodiversity at the right density levels, you can actually lower ground temperatures by up to 8 degrees year round, which is insane because there's more carbon and more methane stored in the Arctic than anywhere else on the planet. Double what's in the atmosphere. And methane, just, is about 30 times worse than CO2 in the atmosphere. So if we can preserve that and build kind of this lush nitrogen oxygen cycle in the winters and summers with the right level of biodiversity there, we can make a material impact on, kind of rejuvenating this ecosystem, which used to be really, really lush and really valuable for carbon sequestration. And so, so that was his vision.
How does that work, though? How does that? But I'm curious how that works. What are mammoths doing in the Arctic that somehow keeps? So they're heavy and they're big. That's all I got.
Yes, which they're great carbon stores in themselves, right? Like elephants are. But 4 kind of really big things. Number one, just any big grazing population that is eating and defecating and spreading does a better job of creating more biodiversity in the plant life that's there. So you have kind of that rich oxygen nitrogen cycle where you have these large herbivores, number one. Number two, elephants, which I didn't, at the time I was like, wait, are we starting a war against trees here, George? Because he was like, well, elephants love knocking down trees. And I was like, wait, is that a good thing? I've always like, don't we want to plant trees?
Yeah, we're supposed to plant trees.
Yeah, exactly. But it turns out there's been studies that have shown that 2 interesting studies that 2 different sets of studies that have shown that elephants, actually like forest elephants, are incredible environmental modifiers where they actually knock down and destroy the trees that are the least efficient of carbon just naturally, which is just amazing. And that gives room for the other more carbon efficient trees to exist. And in the Arctic, that taiga forest, they are not very efficient carbon sequestration trees. They're actually like these almost like heat lightning rods that don't store carbon very well. They're super dark bark. It collects the energy from the sun and permeates it down into the root structure, and it actually warms it up even more. But if you can transform that taiga, that kind of tundra ecosystem more into an Arctic grassland, we find that's about 6 times more efficient at storing carbon than the taiga forest, number one. And then it's about 2 to 3 times more efficient at what's called the albedo effect, which is light reflection from space. So anything that's not absorbed by those Arctic grasses, it gets restored from space. And then the last thing is this whole massive kind of grazing and herding mentality. They've shown in Pleistocene Park in Siberia that with the right population density of muskox and bison and some horses, that they've actually been able to lower the ground temperatures by up to 8 degrees, because what happens in the winter months is they actually compact that snow. And what that allows for is the Arctic winter winds, which are the cooling effect, that actually it permeates deeper than it would be on that fluffy layer because it's closer to the ground.
It's not insulated, yeah.
Exactly. So the ground gets colder and stays colder longer. So if you start to melt something at negative 20 versus negative 14 degrees, the negative 20 is going to stay cold longer and frozen longer.
That's so you never think this is just one of those amazing, like, isn't nature amazing, where you just look
Nature's
at okay,
awesome.
So they're trampling things down, they're packing snow down, they're knocking down trees that are weak and inefficient and also store heat, and they're also doing all this other stuff that helps store carbon. And it's like, this is why when humans mess with the ecosystem deliberately or otherwise, by killing things, it just has all those knock-on effects that nobody ever would have thought about. Like, why is this getting hotter? Well, actually, the mammoths are gone, and like here's all these dominoes. I'm guessing also that with a big mammal, you can unring the bell if you're like, oh, speaking of it altering the environment, now this thing we never thought about is happening. But with a bird, it's like, well, we're screwed now. We're never getting all those things. Or some sort of worm. It's like we
got to go catch these things. Yeah, we could. Yeah. We do want to be mindful of intended versus unintended consequences. The nice thing about 1,000-pound assets is that you can watch them and help them, and you can I think we can be more mindful of their disbursement into the ecosystem. But there was a paper that just came out a couple months ago around trophic downgrading, this whole concept that if you remove keystone animals from the environment, specifically predators like they did in Yellowstone, it has this cascading effect on the food chain, on the food web, on carbon and whatnot. And I forgot the number, but it's like 9 species, which elephants were one of them. If we make more of them and we protect them, they can offset like all of like car emissions. Like it's
Wow.
crazy
That
to
is
your
crazy.
nature based solution. So I do think that there's, you know, to your point, we saw this in the pandemic. Nature can like repair stuff pretty quick if we kind of give it a chance.
Yeah, give it a little bit of a boost and stop messing with it, I suppose. So, how many mammoths do you need? Not millions, I assume, because that's going to be tricky.
Yeah, and they have a long gestational cycle, right? So there's 22 months of gestation that's required just for birth, and then it's about 12 years to sexual maturity in most elephants, right? And we're not looking at this point to engineer and try to speed that up. Maybe there's ways in the future, but right now we're not, from a pure synthetic biology perspective, we're not currently working on that. But so it takes a long time for those populations to truly grow. So our goal is to start with hundreds, then we want to move to thousands. We can make a material difference from our modeling with, you know, low thousands.
That's incredible. So in a few decades, this could be a thing that's actually doing
A
something.
thing, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And I mean, we've got, and so everything, all the species that we're working on is through surrogacy, you know, for the most part.
had to
We
be
do have
right.
but we do have a 17-person team that's working on ex utero development. You know, what's so weird about my life now, because I come from like software and some space tech, right? Like I thought those were science fiction, right? And what's so weird about my life now is that the de-extinction part of the business doesn't feel like science fiction, because I know where the teams are and I know the process. Kind of like software, it's a systems model that we had to go build to tackle on it. The thing that's the most science fiction to me right now is the ex utero development, and we've had this incredible 17-person team of women and men that are working to, you know, grow animals ex utero. And, you know, it's very early stages. I don't think any of our Gen 1 animals will come from ex utero development, but, you know, if we are successful in that, I think that that's even a bigger game changer for conservation than all of our genetic engineering. Like if we could grow 20 northern white rhinos or 100 northern white rhinos with engineered and genetic diversity, then we could reintroduce them with, you know, mindful partners in the conservation world back into Africa, and save that species, and, you know, open source that tech for anyone in conservation. So that's the science fiction part of where I think we are today.
I love that. I feel there's so many cool ideas that come out of this, and it's just like you can give a lot of them away because the business model is kind of over here, but this other tech that can change the world, but maybe isn't super profitable, is over here, and it's like, all right, fine, we're gonna sell these external wombs for use in, I don't know, agricultural breeding or even human fertility, but like, oh, these endangered species, you can just use that stuff too because it exists.
Exactly. So I don't look, we're not as cool as NASA. Like, I think I would argue NASA like stands for, you know, hope and meaning. And it's arguably, you know, when the US is doing stuff right or wrong, you know, I still think NASA persists, right? I think it's one of those like things that the whole world can get behind. And looking to that Apollo program as, you know, a literal moonshot as are, you know, is kind of the inspiration that all these technologies came off of it. Some of what, you know, some people talk about Tang, but some of these technologies are like fundamental to like internet communication, like right now, right? And so like those are $1 trillion industries that came off of that. And so, you know, we've already spun out our first technology company, which is a computational biology platform. You know, even the pieces to the artificial womb could be helpful. Like right now we've got this really cool hydrogel system that's leveraging AI, computer vision, and a little bit of robotics and microfluidics to basically keep embryos healthier longer at their different developmental stages. So even before you get into the super sci-fi, you know, artificial wombs for all these different animals or humans or whatnot, just that system, if we could make embryos healthier longer from an IVF perspective, that's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like that could be really helpful. So I think there's a lot of these technologies that you know can be monetizable even on the path to our bigger goals.
Yeah, I have more questions about that, but I want to get back to the mammoth here because mammoths have been extinct for 4,000 years, something like that, right? And were they
exactly.
hunted to extinction?
Yeah, Yeah, so there's some debate on this, right? Some people are
Okay.
like, mammoths were not hunted to extinction because the last mammoths died on Wrangel Island, and they were an isolated population through inbreeding and through a genetic bottleneck. But, there's lots of evidence that show that early man, hunted and killed mammoths. There's spear marks in mammoths. There's actual mammoth tusk and teeth that were and bones that were used in early man's weapons and art and they're in France. There's cave drawings of mammoths, so we know that there was this coexistence. What's interesting about some people say, well, it would have been impossible for humans to kill all mammoths, but I think the combination of the climate changing and early man's influence, like you can't. There has been an interesting study last year that shows that the rise of early man and the fall of mammoths were directly inverse, right? And that goes back to the fact that you don't have to kill off all the mammoths to eradicate them like you would do the thylacine, right? Because the thylacine in Australia, it had 13 and a half day gestation. They can produce very, very quickly. But with 22-month gestation, single calves, for the most part, there have been a couple of twins, but for the most part, single calves, and 13 years of sexual maturity, you only have to kill off enough, right? Mm-hmm. Because then the population goes into a slump and, it kind of just kills itself over time because you have natural predation and other things outside of early man. So if you just impact those numbers enough, you will cause that unfortunate demise.
Yeah, you pull out enough Jenga pieces with the climate and hunting and genetic diversity or whatever, and that's it. How does the process work in brief? Okay, no mosquitoes trapped in a piece of amber. Got it. Do you find a tusk and bones in like a mine somewhere, and then you're like, all right, we're gonna drill into this thing and get some DNA out of there? And
so you can get it in a lot of different places. Different animals have different ways of extracting the DNA, but I'll talk about mammoths. And to your mine question, I was just in North Dakota where they just discovered another with the governor and team there, and they just discovered, in a mine,
wow.
in a working mine, an entire or partially entire mammoth that had actually soft tissue on it. So,
God, imagine finding that. You're digging for some bauxite or whatever. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah,
and you're like,
well, here's a tusk, right? That's exactly what they saw first. They saw the tusk. And so in the permafrost and other areas that are extremely cold, mammoths would die. They would they'd freeze very quickly, and then they'd get layered snow, unlike hot, wet environments where they just decompose very, very quickly. And so for us, though, it's still very degraded. So you can get DNA from tusk, you can get it from some bone, some soft tissue, but teeth is a great area to get DNA specifically for. It's stored really well there. And so for us to build kind of what we need, it's not a true reference genome, but to build kind of the framework of a reference genome that we could use, it took us about 54 mammoth genomes.
Yeah.
So
okay.
About 5 of those were public. About 5 of those, Ariana Husili, our head of biological sciences and the mammoth lead, who worked for George and went to Siberia with George, they got about 5 of those from retrieving them from the permafrost. And then one of our collaborators, Luva Dahlin at University of Stockholm, who's incredible, he actually is one of the top mammoth researchers in the world. He let us leverage 44 of his unpublished mammoth genomes. So it's kind of that assembly of all of that and that analysis that you can really start to understand, was this the gene that caused X, or this a cluster of genes that caused X, or was this diversity? And so you really have to get that level of get to the population genomics level so that you can start understanding and narrowing down your targets.
Right, because otherwise, if you have just a damaged piece of DNA, you don't know if that missing part is the one that's whole in this other specimen, or if that was totally different in both of those species. Or
was this a Wrangel Island piece, and this piece of DNA is going to be really bad, right? If we were to produce it. So there's a lot of computation. So George, as I mentioned, did 6 to 8 years of analysis. The tools have come a long way. We built an entire software company around doing the analysis of the mammoth, and then spun it out. But yeah, doing that work and leveraging the latest tools has been critical. And we have it was about 65. It's grown a little bit. It's now in the low 70s. There's about 70 targeted genes that drive all the core phenotypes that have been lost in the elephant lineage.
So if the DNA from one animal specimen is damaged, can you use DNA from another specimen to fill in the
That's
gaps?
That's a
Yeah.
great question. That's the kind of Jurassic Park question. Think of it
Yeah.
exactly reverse. We use the DNA of the Asian elephant, which is 99.6% the same as the mammoth, as the reference genome. So we build a reference genome, which we were the first to ever build a reference genome for the Asian elephant and the African elephant. And once again, that has conservation benefits. So we published that, we gave that to the world, and then we use that as our map, right? Because we know like that DNA was taken from a live elephant, so we know that this DNA and this map produced this elephant because we took the blood from it, right? We know that worked. And then we use that to build, and that with other elephants, to build a reference genome that we can do comparison from. But what's interesting is that this is an interesting stat that I learned in this process. An Asian elephant is 99.6% a woolly mammoth genetically. It's actually closer to a mammoth than an Asian elephant is to an African elephant.
Really? God, you wouldn't have guessed
Exactly, because
that.
we would just think that. I mean, I thought that African elephants and Asian elephants were just so close that
Well, yeah.
I had no idea that the mammoths were actually closer.
Thought it would be like the difference between somebody with blue eyes and somebody with brown eyes, or like dark hair and light hair. That's kind of what I figured.
Exactly. But
Wow.
Asian elephants and African elephants can actually still interbreed and produce viable offspring. So it's even it's a weird biology. It's so weird, and strange.
It's so amazing. So this becomes not like a chimera, but like a hybrid species with DNA from non-extinct species mixed with, or you're even mixing the. It sounds like you're adding the mammoth DNA to the elephant, not the other way around. So it's you're kind of adding the cold weather. You're adding the hair to the et cetera, in the fat.
Well, there's more. There's
there's
hair
more.
and fat, and there's more under the hood too. But and kind of the subsystems and how they work, and curved tusk, and there's a lot more to it. But directionally, 100% accurate in terms of how you're thinking about it. But all animals are effectively hybrids. I was on a podcast or interview like a couple months ago, and I got into this like philosophical debate, and this guy was not happy with me, which is fine. Like for us,
not a real mammoth. Yeah.
they were going down the dodo. They're like, a dodo is just, you're not building a dodo. You're building a stupid, this is the direct quote, I think. It was like a stupid looking pigeon. And I was like, but sir, dodos were pigeons. Like they were, like they are pigeons. Dodos are stupid looking pigeons. A mammoth is a hairy elephant. Those are just facts. They're pachyderm. Like those are facts. And so we get in there. There's like, for a while, we had this percentage of people that were like, we don't believe it's possible. And then they kind of trend to, oh no, maybe it's possible, but we don't know if you should do it. And then we try to explain why we're doing it. Like, but it's not 100%. I was like,
right.
Well, my dog is a rescue and she's awesome. She's not, she's 100% dog, but she's not purebred. And so it's like, where do you draw the lines? Like if an Asian elephant can interbreed with a mammoth, does that mean that it's not a mammoth? Like all species go through a hybridization process that creates a new species. That is the process. So there is a percentage of people that like to argue the semantics of what we're doing, but it just doesn't affect me.
Well, on that same annoying line of thought, is it really a mammoth if it's just the DNA, but it's not raised by other mammoths? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is they don't have the same habits of other mammoths because they're not raised by like a mammoth mom. And I asked this of Forrest because I was like, how's it going to learn how to do mammoth stuff? Like,
no, that's a great question, right? And so a couple things. We work with a lot of different partners around the world. So we've been fortunate. We're partners with Elephant Havens and International Elephant Foundation and Save the Elephants. A lot of people are like, but do we think conservation groups hate you? I was like, well, have you been to our homepage? Because it's on our homepage. But in all seriousness, you can learn a lot from existing folks that have been working in this for decades. And so, Elephant Havens, for example, we're working on a project right now leveraging computer vision and AI to understand herd dynamics and rewilding of orphaned elephants. That's what they do. They do that is their nonprofit is focusing they're a great group in Botswana that focuses on looking at elephants and saving orphaned elephants and helping rebuild herds for rewilding, right? And so for us, we can learn from that. We can try to be a little bit smarter and layer in AI and computer vision, so it doesn't always have to be a human in the loop scenario. That kind of comes from our tech background, and then we can apply that, to our herds. And I didn't know this either, because I always think of like Asian elephant, tropical equals hot, right? Like in my very simple cave brand, in my Neanderthal brain. But there's interesting. We've actually worked with some groups in Canada that have Asian elephants that once again follows that kind of same line, that in Canada, and in the winter, they sleep in barns and whatnot. They can't go to like -40, but they actually break through. They actually let them out. They break through the ice. They swim in frozen lakes.
Wow.
I have videos of mammoths like playing with like snowballs and stuff, and they're just rolling around having a great time. Like, not like, and these are elephant behavioralists that are with them that aren't like, these are like distressed mammoths. They like can't wait to like play in the snow. And it's the same thing for mammoths. Mammoths actually went into pretty warm temperatures too. And so those ecosystems still exist that can survive that. But even an Asian elephant today, raised by an Asian elephant mom, can survive and start playing around in a snow filled envierment. And so,
right, okay. Yeah, you said mammoths, but you meant elephants. I was like, you already have mammoths?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
No. We did
in
not.
the cold water.
There's no secret mammoths. Sorry, there were Asian elephants playing in the water. Yes.
That does make sense. And so what you end up with is, and again, I'm not trying to be like, it's not a real mammoth, bro, but it's a proxy species, an animal that holds its same place in the ecosystem, right?
Exactly. It's an animal that holds in with the core genes and traits that have been lost to that lineage, right? So I think that the definition of de-extinction, like on Wikipedia, is like the bringing back of or creation. I think they may have added this for us. We did not add it though. Of a proxy species that even resembles that of the extinct species. So it's a new category. So it's constantly evolving and being redefined.
Thanks for watching on YouTube. Remember, you can also enjoy The Jordan Harbinger Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our podcast feed is a treasure trove of insights from intellectuals, authors, spies, artists, athletes, pioneers, engineers, former mafia bosses, and business leaders, all sharing their secrets to success. For more information, click the link in the description. Now, back to the show. I assume you're not going to make the mammal down there in Austin, because it seems like something with a ton of hair would be uncomfortable in that hot climate. I mean, maybe you can speak from personal experience. All my hairiest friends don't last very long in Texas. It seems like a mammoth would be no exception.
And our two biggest labs are in Dallas, and until today, I'm in one of our labs right now, and until today, it was 111, and so all the core engineering is happening in Boston. Happening here at our lab here, and then we will start to look for not just rewilding locations but raising locations. And so we just announced, we actually didn't really announce it, but it did get out in the press. We just announced a partnership with North Dakota. We are talking to other states as well, and we're talking to Canada. We're talking to some folks all over kind of not just the Arctic Circle, but Circle Polar North, which is even bigger. I got to spend about 10 days in Alaska last year meeting with Lieutenant Governor and a bunch of folks. But we just did a partnership with North Dakota that the government actually invested in Colossal, which is great.
Yeah.
And so we're long-term collaborator, and we want to build. It's a great location because they actually get down to -30 in parts during the winter in North Dakota. And so it's a great state that, I think could be we haven't made a definitive decision, but it could be a place where we have early mammoth calves because it's got a pretty temperate summer and then a great winter for them.
Wow, it's so incredible. I wonder, I'm always like, this is so great. I'm so optimistic about this kind of stuff. But what about other general public perception? How do we get the whole world on board with something that is so radical? Because you certainly must be getting letters from people that are like, this is against what, nature intended, and this is demonic of you, or just like you're insane.
So we get a lot of feedback.
Feedback's a good word for
it. Feedback. But so before I answer that, I want to say one thing about kind of the last thing. What I didn't know about this business, which I found really interesting, was it's very hard to build a system that is computational analysis and has this Indiana Jones ancient DNA component, has this Jurassic Park genetic engineering component, has this conservation department. But what I didn't, that's all hard. That's all real hard. Building tech, that's all very difficult. Software and technology and sciences, biology is not easy. But what I didn't anticipate is we spend and have teams, as many teams, working with the public, working with the government, working with legislators, working with nonprofits, working with indigenous people groups. Like today, I was on the phone with one of the largest indigenous people groups in the United States, just hearing their cultural feedback and what we're doing. So we try to take a very inclusive strategy, which gets into your question. But there's a lot around the company that has nothing to do with making a mammoth or a dodo or a thylacine. There's so much around the company that also you have to do and be very mindful of. If we could just stay in our lab and make mammoths and then someone could just run with it from there, that'd be awesome. But that there's a lot of extra around it that I did not necessarily anticipate from day one. And in public sentiment, we've garnered, now I don't even know the number, 60, 70 billion media impressions since launch. We haven't even, produced an animal. And so people are pretty excited. Interestingly enough, to your question, 98% positive or neutral feedback. And I would consider neutral feedback, at least our PR teams are telling us that neutral feedback is anything that, has both a positive sentiment and reflects that, as well as the negative, and is fair and balanced reporting, right?
Got it. And seems interesting. Hope it doesn't ruin the whole planet. Is that neutral feedback? Okay.
Yeah, or what? And so for us, we do get a lot of feedback. I will say that we get more positive if you take out neutral. We get significantly more positive, about 4 to 1, than negative, which is amazing. And I think that we've had a very good attitude that some of our top critics, even at launch, like Lou Vidal was a critic at launch. We didn't include him, gave us fees. Like, is this didn't really know us. We're like, who are these guys out of the blue that are just saying this crazy stuff? And then instead of just ignoring them or complaining about them, we try to reach out to them and try to work with them, because if you are what we call an informed critic, you're pretty smart and you're informed about something that we're doing. And maybe you're totally wrong, but maybe you're totally right and we missed something. Mm-hmm. And so if we didn't have Lou Vidal, for example, as a part of our project, our work would be significantly harder. And so we reached out to him and said, well, what do you not like about what we're doing? Where could we be better? And so we try to run towards critics versus away from them. But once again, that's the category of informed critics. There's sometimes we do get annoyed by just what I call the uninformed critics of I'm a curator at some random museum that no one's ever heard of, and I have an opinion on genetic engineering, but I've never taken a genetic engineering class in the world. But I don't believe George Church, the father of genetic engineering, right? That feedback isn't as helpful. So
yeah, that makes sense. That's I think we call that haterade in the sphere that I'm in. Yeah,
yeah. We do get some haterade. We get some we get some religious debates on it.
Yeah.
We try to be really mindful and listen to them. We think that it's, from a religious perspective, we think that we play God when we eradicate a species or we destroy the ecosystem. And so we try to listen and give that feedback. But at the same time, we've also taken the reality is we're going to do the best we can. We're going to do some shit that's really wrong, and we're going to do the best to fix it. And we're gonna try to do a lot more right than we do wrong. And, we'll try to learn from our mistakes and from the public, but, we're not going to do everything right. So we can't please everybody.
Yeah. I don't know. I wonder if there's religious criticism for this. I do wonder how they sort of explain the Noah's Ark thing, where they he had direct permission from God. I mean, that's probably the counter, but it's the guy literally built a boat to save the animals and put them on there. I mean, whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I'm no expert.
But we're also helping biobank stuff. So in a way, it's very Noah's Ark-ish.
It's very Noah's Ark-ish, man.
We're preserving species. That's not a bad thing, regardless of where you fall on the religious or belief spectrum. If you are doing things to help preserve the value of life, that seems like a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's the whole concept of shepherding. I'm, again, no expert on religion, but so what is the target date for you petting a mammoth and getting that historic, iconic photo that you've been dreaming about for a decade or whatever here?
So our goal is 2028 for our first calves.
Oh, wow.
And we are on track for that.
Really?
As you know,
that's amazing.
Science is hard, engineering's hard. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, we have over 35, 37 people. I don't know the exact count off the top of my head on just the Mammoth team alone. So it's a lot of people.
Wow.
And so, and we aren't still thinking about it. So we've established multiple cell lines, gone through and expanded the edits list, and we are actually making edits and stacking edits and we're advancing multiplex editing. There's a couple parts of the project that, are later stage on the gestational side that we will announce maybe later this year or next year. Some really interesting milestones on that have been achieved. And so we feel confident about that date. If it slips, I think it could slip months to a year, but it's not going to be like, in 2050 maybe, right?
Right, it's not
we
fusion.
We feel
We're
pretty
still
confident.
10 years away from fusion. Every 5 years we hear that.
We've been 10 years away from fusion since before I was born.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. I was going to say it's something about the 60s when they were doing nuclear.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful on it. Like no one would be. I mean, we'd all be happy if we get there. And I think we all. What was that movie we saw with Val Kilmer and like fusion? And we're like, yes.
That was The Saint, where he's stealing the secret.
Yes.
Yeah, from Elizabeth Shue, who's the person who invented nuclear fusion. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I can't believe I remember that.
Was my young love crush was Elizabeth Shue.
Well, join the club. Get in line, pal. Yeah, get in line.
Adventures in Babysitting. I'm like, please.
So good. That was a good movie too, man. Remember?
Underrated.
It gets into like a switchblade fight in the subway of New York. Yeah, and never with the babysitter.
Like the kid that wants to be like Thor. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they edited it for TV, and she says, "Don't mess with it, or never mess with the babysitter," as she slams a switchblade through his foot.
This may be my first Adventures in Babysitting podcast reference. It may be. I'm not 100%.
Certainly for me, I haven't thought about that movie probably since I saw it on Channel 20 in the 80s or 90s, whenever it came out on television. I love that you reach out to your critics. I think that's important. I mean, for every white-bearded, what was his name? John Hammond welcoming you to Jurassic Park, there's a Jeff Goldblum somewhere who's shaking his head and being like, chaos theory, life finds a way, right? And you're like, I better find out what that means.
And all the top 10 quotes we get tweeted at quite a lot.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
By the same 20 people, but yeah.
Yeah, but the same movie nerds. But that guy, like, the point is he wasn't wrong, right? He was kind of like, well, if they'd asked me, maybe I wouldn't have done the frog DNA thing. Because wasn't the idea they were going to get off the island because of what they had from the frogs, and then they were going to swim to New York and kill everyone?
Yeah, they know that. The frog DNA allowed them to like amorphize sex, and so they were all females. But then they were able to start breeding because they were able to change their sex based on some frogs. So
right, the asexual reproduction or whatever it was called. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And man, I'm looking at the collapse of species and things like that, and we're slated to lose 50% of all biodiversity between now and 2050, and it's really horrific. 1,000 to 10,000 times higher in terms of loss of species than natural extinction rate. So what you're doing is providing a backup plan. What do we call it? The sixth extinction crisis or something like that? Is that what we're in right now?
Sixth mass extinction.
Yeah. So that's horrific.
And it's driven by us. It's completely driven by us.
Well, yeah, that's the most depressing part is it's something that we could control. And it sounds like Colossal is going to be able to speak the language of money, right? So while we might take a multi-trillion-dollar hit from ecosystem decline, we can say, hey, this is going to stem that, and also we're going to do something cool that like our media brain can pay attention to, which is bring back extinct species.
And I think that people can. I think we're bringing awareness to the bio. I mean, I hope. Maybe I'm wrong, but I hope we're bringing awareness to the biodiversity crisis that we're in. I hope we're doing a good job and good steward of that message. And I hope we're bringing attention to the great women and men that are solving real problems in conservation. But I do think that if we can use the de-extinction of a couple of these species to develop tech that conservationists don't have the money to go or expertise to go develop, I think that's huge. I think that's a win for humanity, not just a win for Colossal.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody listening probably would agree with that. What ethical considerations are there? Is it? I mean, it's exciting to de-extinctify a species, but I'm sure there's somewhere some responsible scientist is like, well, you haven't. Someone's Jeff Goldbluming this whole thing, right? And what is that criticism or what is that concern?
So we have an incredible team of scientific, executive, and conservation advisors that help us. One of our bioethicists is Alta Charo. She's incredible. To the point about running towards your critics. pre-launch, I was like, who should we have from bioethics perspective? And I actually saw an interview where she debated George Church on why you should never bring back a mammoth. So I was like, she's the one, because she's probably thought through this pretty well. So we got Alta. We spent a lot of time with her. I think she realized that someone's going to do this, and we were trying to do this the most transparent, ethical way possible. Gave us a lot of feedback, helped us build an ethical framework of how we think about these projects. And what's interesting is then, like 3 months before, not maybe 3 weeks before launch, within a month before launch, I was talking to her, and she's like, have you thought about doing a genetically modified tomato first? And I was like, oh my gosh, the train's left the station. Like, we've been out raising money, hiring people. We can't, like, my bioethics is, wait, what? And so I had this like panic moment of like, please
remember
tell
when
me.
you gave us $200 million for the mammoth? Hear me out here. Tomato.
Yeah.
Instead.
Tomatoes. No, it's going to be a very cold tolerant tomato.
Give me my money back, buddy.
Yeah. It's like, here's our ABA and routing number. And so what's interesting though, is, so we joked when we talked through that, but we spent a lot of time thinking about that. We have a whole animal husbandry group, an animal welfare group, a conservation group. As I mentioned earlier, we have this entire group of people that in parts of the business that, I honestly didn't think when we were starting the business that I guess I knew people would be excited. I knew we needed to take care of the animals and have an animal husbandry and welfare group. But just thinking through all of the touch points that go into the project outside the science is something that, we have had great guidance from Alta and others on. But those ethical considerations of what animal should you bring back? Why should you bring it back? How do you pair it? We've got some ideas around, not just the conservation side, but how we pair de-extinction events with conservation events in interesting ways, and show that the technology that we develop for species X is directly applicable to a sister or cousin species, right? So we're working on some interesting models with governments around that we think, could be, helpful, or and not just, it's not really positioning, but it's really helpful in educating, the public, because fundamentally it's not really our job to persuade anyone. It's our job to educate people what we're doing and then try to listen and do better, right? And so if we can find opportunities to educate, the conservation community, the general public, governments on loss of biodiversity and how the pursuit of de-extinction these technologies can directly go into their conservation pipelines, then I think that solves a lot of the ethical challenges around this.
Yeah, it's a heavy lift. You've got to have government cooperation too. Otherwise, right, you could put mammals in Siberia and then they get poached, or like some billionaire goes and kills one and takes a selfie, or people start eating it or whatever, selling them to people to kill because they're just out there.
The Jimmy John's founder is not an investor in Colossal.
Was that the guy that went and killed a lion and just got absolutely skewered for it?
I think, or multiple things, like while eating one of his sandwiches or something.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, there was a dentist that went and killed that lion, that endangered one, or the one they lured out of the preserve. That guy just, I think he had to retire because people were just like, this guy is dead meat. I mean, he never recovered from that.
And I get that there's some, so I'm not a hunter. Not probably out of any philosophy. I just never my thing. It's not I don't really have hobbies, so it's definitely not one of the ones I don't have. But I do understand that there are pockets of like overpopulation in certain species that hunting makes sense. So I am not against philosophically hunting. Like we eat a lot. I'm also not a vegan, so I do eat meat, animal products, and so I know those come from somewhere. I'm not like, oh, these were just magically made in the lab. So, but what I will say is that I do think to your point, we have to be very mindful about the animals, because for us, if we spend all this money and time and effort on bringing back these species and then some random person shoots it, that's just awful. So we're trying to get ahead of that. We've already been working on facilities. There's some great technology companies out there that we aren't currently working with, but my last company is in defense, so I know a lot of the big defense technology companies and some of the newer ones. We'd love to collaborate with those guys. on tech to protect the animals in sanctuaries and whatnot. So we're in the early stages of that, but we're at least thinking we're at least conceptualizing ideas.
If you can add cold resistance to an elephant, which is, sort of the first principles, basic thing here, is there a future in which...
No, it's great.
Is there a future in which you can add radiation resistance to humans? Not that exact thing, but modify other...
So at our core, right, Colossal is starting to understand genotype to phenotype, like gene to physical expression. Like we are understanding that and building core technologies around that to make it to make editing easier and whatnot. Like one of the big areas of our focus is called multiplex editing. There's people talk about CRISPR and other things, but there's one that's where you not do a single knockout or make a single nucleotide, like one little edit. One of the big areas we focus on is multi-gene edits. Like a lot of disease states aren't a single, like sickle cell is like a single gene mutation, but a lot of disease states require gene edits on multiple genes at the same time. And so in building technologies that allows us to be very efficient without causing all these unintended consequences or off-target, also known as off-target effects in the genome, where it like kind of fucks up something you weren't planning on, is kind of core to the technology set that we are developing. And I think that the combination of those will allow for understanding trait, ultimate trait, response or engineering through kind of that computational analysis and editing abilities. And so to your point, Chris Mason, by the way, I don't know if you ever get plugs, but you should get Chris Mason is another person you should talk to. I think he's super crazy and interesting, like George. And Chris, he has a book that's called like the 500-year person, or humans in 500 years, something like that. And one of his big things is radiation tolerance. He works really closely with SpaceX and NASA and whatnot. So he's on our scientific advisory board. He's amazing and awesome, crazy. He's crazy smart, from New York, just a great guy. Has the Mason Lab at Cornell, and that's one of the big things that Chris is interested in. And so we've actually worked on a paper together with George and a few others on radiation tolerance in humans and whatnot. So we at Colossal aren't focusing on that, but I do believe there's a world, at some point in the future where we're seeing, gene editing or gene manipulation, even on a complex multiplex edited basis, that has incredibly possible effects on humans. So for me, I'll give you a real world example today.
Sure.
We did not develop this. But you've probably heard of statins and like all these drugs that like
cholesterol
lower
stuff.
Your cholesterol. Yeah. So I don't take statins. I have a million reasons why I don't take statins. That's a whole podcast in itself. But I have genetically high cholesterol. Well, I take a PCSK9 inhibitor, which basically blocks the way a certain gene responds. It's 2 shots a month and lowers my cholesterol by 60%.
Wow.
That's incredible. Like that, and that was a study that was actually ironically done by Helen Hobbs, another one of our advisors here in Texas, and they found that it's a game changer for people that have high cholesterol, whether that's through lifestyle or genetics. Especially it's through genetics, which was in my case, and it was a game changer. Like within 5 days of taking my first shot, I was like, wait, I've never seen numbers like that. That's truly remarkable. And so, and that's just us, blocking it. So think about the point when we can just edit that gene and everyone in the population doesn't have that. So we aren't doing human genome engineering, but the technologies are here, and now we need to wrap we need to make those technologies better, and we need to wrap the right regulation and ethics around them. Mm-hmm. But I do see a world where a lot of disease states can be eradicated.
I love that stuff. Radiation resistance in humans for space travel reasons, or for living on another planet or something like that, if we need it, with less atmosphere, or even something more closer to home, like helping animals who their natural environment is mostly gone. So you make it so that they can digest different foods or live in a colder or warmer climate by tweaking something.
Like heat. Yeah, like drought-resistant cattle and things like that. I think that's the world that we are in, and I think these tools kind of give us some level of dominion not really over biology, but with biology. Like, we as humans can work with biological systems and help engineer a path where there's a better coexistence.
So this is probably I'm embarrassed that I'm asking you this, and I don't want to waste your time if this is way out there. But is the dinosaur thing possible? Why or why not? Because people are going to be like, to ask him about T-Rex. So ask ask him about Velociraptors, and I'm gonna. So here it is.
So yes. Believe it or not, we do get this question also
I'm sure
around dinosaurs. So I don't want to break hearts, but there is no true dino DNA. One of our other advisors, Kenneth Lacavara, by the way, these are all really interesting women and men. So if you ever are like, oh my gosh, I'm bored and Jordan needs something new, if you ever ping me, I'll introduce you to these people because they're amazing. But Kenneth Lacavara is arguably one of the coolest. He is definitely the coolest paleontologist on the planet, and he's one of the most famous. And one of his big claims to fame is, of the dinosaurs that have been discovered, the top 4 biggest, including Dreadnoughtus, which is the largest dinosaur ever discovered, was discovered by Kenneth. And he's awesome. He's just incredible. And he has actually developed a way to demineralize dinosaur bones or fragments of dinosaur bones so that he could identify the amino acids. That's really helpful from a paleontology perspective, because you could be in the field and you could be like, this looks like a Triceratops bone, but there are no Triceratops bone. If you do this process, you could say, oh, maybe this has the markers of a Triceratops. But those are amino acids, like individual pieces of the genomes. They're not big fragments or even small fragments or genes. So there is there is amino acids. There's probably a gene or two out there that has been found and discovered. But fundamentally, there's not big strands of dinosaur DNA. So I do believe it's impossible. I shouldn't say impossible, because I don't like to say impossible. George kind of broke me of that, and he doesn't say impossible. I do think it's highly unlikely someone could de-extinct a dinosaur because there's just no DNA.
Yeah, you'd have to make. It would have to be when we can construct DNA almost out of like whole cloth, and then you make something that looks like what we think it probably looked like.
You could probably humankind probably at some point could engineer through DNA synthesis and doing like ancestral shape reconstructions using AI and much harder systems than LLMs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't believe it's possible, and I personally do not see a path to really de-extincting a dinosaur, even in the way that Colossal defines de-extinction.
Even that's also just like what we would literally just make a Jurassic Park zoo out of it, which is a little bit like, do we really need that? Do we need that? I don't know if we need that. It seems a little bit cruel to make something and it's like, this is here for you to gawk at, and then for us to treat it kind of shitty. Yeah, I don't think we need that. What other animals are on the roadmap? Even if the roadmap is like a list in your head, big stupid pigeon is the dodo. What else?
We get that. Yeah, stupid pigeon, stupid looking pigeon. Like I was like, but sir, it is we're very focused on the mammoth, thylacine, and dodo. We get a lot of kind of like dinosaurs. We get a lot of requests, and there's a part of me that's like, well, shouldn't we just finish these? We get a lot of requests for new species. We are funding some academic labs on other species. We are thinking about it. One species that we are not working on, but I'm very excited about, which I'd love to make, is the stellar sea cow. It's like a whale-sized.
Wow.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's like a whale-sized manatee. So think of it like a giant manatee in the Pacific Northwest, all over Alaska, all over all the way from Oregon up through Washington, and it was hunted to extinction. And it was vital. It really helped promote and circulate the kelp forest of the Pacific Northwest. The kelp forest, another thing that's great for carbon and carbon sequestration. The stellar sea cow was instrumental in making that ecosystem even healthier, significantly healthier than it is today. But what's hard about the stellar sea cow, we actually have genomes, we actually have DNA. But there's nothing to gestate it in. So you can't gestate a whale-sized manatee in a manatee, right? Or in a dugong or something else. So you have to be really mindful about, like for us, the whole system has to work. I do think that that would be a great species. If we get ex utero developed, I will make the commitment that if we get artificial wombs to work and work at like whale size, we'll totally do that one because that would be amazing.
That is really interesting.
It'd be awesome. It'd be great.
Yeah,
and then
really,
there's I was going to say if we get the avian genomics, if we get success in creating these like primordial germ cells, which are it's a little bit different with avian genomics versus the system that we built for mammalian work. If we get that right, I think there's a lot of bird species like the moa and others that could be really, really cool. But I think that we and like Mike McGrew he's one of our advisors, are probably now the furthest when it comes to genetic engineering in birds. From what we've already built in this year, which is amazing. But I think that we could get to the point that we could do some pretty cool birds. Those would be on my list. Like
really cool
I think the moa is awesome, and I think that there's a lot of great extinct species.
What is the moa? I don't even know what that is.
Oh, it's like, so the moa was like, think of it like a giant emu or ostrich in New Zealand. It was like its big iconic extinct species is the moa. It's super, super cool. Big flightless bird.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That is It's enormous. It's enormous.
Well,
it's bigger than a person.
Yeah. It's like 12, 14 feet, something like that. And,
oh my God.
And then it was actually here's what's even weirder. It was the prey of the Haast eagle. So think about that. There's a bigger giant eagle that's extinct, and that is basically a pterodactyl, right?
My God, that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. That would be that's scary.
Do not bring that one back. If that eats a bird that's bigger than a human, that would just fly around big events and pick people off.
That'd be terrifying. Yeah.
Wow.
It'd be like the Jurassic World scene. But
oh God.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's like, maybe that's good.
Yeah, maybe that one. Yeah. Was that extinct because is that like a dinosaur era thing, or was that hunted to extinction?
No. That's in the last couple hundred years. So that's in its primary food source was moa, which partially was hunted. The other thing was the introduction of invasive species. What a lot of people don't realize is that, like, a lot of people will say, like, oh, the dodo was just killed because it was stupid and people were hungry, which isn't necessarily the case. They laid one egg a year, and they were a flightless bird, meaning that egg was on the ground. So, if you introduce rats and wild pigs and other things to wild dogs, and they eat those eggs, there's no more, right? This kind of like the elephant example.
I was going to ask about invasive species because, I don't see how you could really do this accidentally, but you'd have to be really careful. You hear about how, like, a certain kind of mussel or a bug costs the economy billions of dollars in some areas because they're impossible to get rid of. The pigs on the islands are tearing up all the vegetation and killing all the dodos, and the rats are eating the bird eggs, and the bugs are eating all the trees. Like, that stuff's hard. You can do it. Unring that bell.
You can do it. It's hard to unring, but you can do it very thoughtfully. So, like, this whole concept, we aren't working on this, but there are folks that are looking at this. I don't know if there's that many cat hate groups here in the United States, but in Australia they are, because cats, which were introduced for captivity purposes and pet purposes, have gone crazy in Australia, and there's just a ton of them, and they are eviscerating all of the small mammal or small marsupial populations, which are only endemic there. They only exist in Australia. And so there's been talks, we aren't doing this, but we've had conversations with different groups and governments around this, is that you can introduce this concept, which I'm actually very pro, which is called the gene drive. So it doesn't go out and kill the cat, but it makes it where if this cat, eats a certain food or whatever the necessary delivery mechanism, they're doing this also with invasive carp species, this fish species in Australia, where if the cat eats this, it basically makes it become reproductively unviable. So that cat gets to live out its natural life and, be a stray cat and kill marsupials and do all the stuff it does. But then but it can't mate. And so, several generations from now, you get to the point that isolated population of cat doesn't exist, right? And so this whole concept of gene drives is very, very interesting to remove invasive species. And I'll give you one other example that is being worked on. We're pseudo collaborating on it. It's not a focus of us. We're just helping the lab a little bit. But there's this incredible animal that's beautiful called the quoll in Australia. It's awesome. It looks kind of like a mongoose. It's a spotted quoll. You should look at it. It's beautiful. But it's endangered and moving towards critically endangered because guess what? It loves to eat toads. And settlers out of Australia introduced these animals called cane toads. So if you have a picture of the quoll on one side, you put a picture of the cane toad on the other side. Cane toads are just disgusting. They're just gross. And they eat them, but because of the neurotoxin in the cane toad, it kills the quolls. But and by the way, it kills other marsupials that eat it as well. It is, I think it's why I would probably get this wrong. It's either 1 or 2 gene edits that make the quoll resistant to the cane toads. So now you don't have to go kill all the cane toads. You could make minor modifications to populations of quolls, and they already love to eat the cane toads. It just kills them. And they could eradicate the cane toads. And so that's the power of gene drives. And so I do think that we can be very smart and let nature, if we give nature a little bit of boost, we could let nature help fix the problems that we created themselves. We could empower the quolls to kill all the cane toads.
Yeah, you're kind of speeding up natural selection by a few, I don't know.
It's a directed evolution. Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of years by making sure that it doesn't die, but ends up sort of stemming the tide of battle or whatever. And it's so interesting. Thylacine is what? A big cat, Tasmanian tiger, dodo bird.
Well, so the thylacine is it's called the Tasmanian tiger, but it's actually a big carnivorous marsupial. So it has a pouch and everything. So most people think it's either based on the name, they think it's a cat, or they see it and they think it, because of convergent evolution, it's not related at all to dogs or canids. But it looks very similar, like the morphology of the shape and the shape of the skull. If you have a wolf skull and a thylacine skull, they look almost identical, even though they're not related, just due to this concept of convergent evolution. They both evolved independently that are very, very similar.
Yeah, I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's like some kind of, I don't know if it looked just like I don't even know because I'm no animal expert. I was like, it's either a hyena or a big cat or something. I can't really tell.
Yeah.
Wolfy thing. Yeah, it's so incredible that this stuff is even possible. I mean, it's really. When I saw Jurassic Park, I was like, well, this is obviously fake and never going to happen. And I mean, look, dinosaurs still not going to happen, but it's really, little did I think like, oh, we're going to use some version of this technology to do something in my lifetime. That part had not ever occurred to me.
Yeah, same. I mean, I was inspired by it. It made me excited about genetics, but it was until George spent 30 seconds at the end of the call. Just kind of hit me at the right time.
Yeah, man, you remember Samuel L. Jackson was in Jurassic Park and he was like a computer expert? That's not what you expect from Samuel L. Jackson.
No. Now, yeah, exactly. What was his hold on to your butts was like his famous
hold on to your
line.
butts. Yeah, and now I'm tired of all these, I don't know, whatever, fill in the blank. I just says a family podcast. But computer expert Samuel L. Jackson, who in my imagination probably only uses AOL email like my parents. Well, man, it sounds
Samuel L. Jackson at Hotmail. Yeah, if that's his email address, I'm really sorry that I ruined it for him.
Yeah, well, it's time to get off Hotmail anyway, and that was just the final push. It sounds like you've got it's a mammoth task ahead of you, man, and I've been holding on to that one since I started prepping the show.
Yeah, it's a big hairy goal, so we'll get there.
And I wish you all the best. I would love to come and say what you're doing at some point if that's even allowed. I don't know.
Absolutely. It's I mean, I'm always happy to talk about it because I'm excited about it. Talking to our scientists is way better. coming to the lab is a billion times better over talking to me, but talking to the incredible women and men that are doing the work, it's just awesome. So you're welcome anytime. Like it's amazing. Like you would have the most fun. Like ask Forrest. Forrest comes and he's like, how do I get, every time Forrest is here, I get texts like a day later. It's like, how do I get more involved? How do I get more involved? So
it's really amazing. And I'm looking forward to that news release where it's just you with a baby mammoth. I mean, that's going to be that. You must just be dreaming about that moment every night when you're actually able to sleep.
I mean, yeah, I do. I do. I'm very excited about, we've made a bunch of big promises and it's our job to deliver on those promises. And yeah, I'm excited about that because I think it's not, I think that's it's delivering on George. I always like to say I'm kind of a steward of George's vision. So I'd love to deliver that for George and for the world. So I'm pretty stoked.
Ben Lamm, thank you very much, man.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube is not the only place that you can check out The Jordan Harbinger Show. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you will find access to our shows that don't appear on YouTube, like Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, even lawns, to find out if they're backed by science and logic, or if they're just complete nonsense. Spoiler, many of them are complete nonsense. Also, our Feedback Friday shows where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, all the way down to the bottom of the barrel. And every episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Life can be hard, yes, but we are here to help. And if you appreciate how we help, remember to like, comment, and subscribe.